All right, now good.
All right. Am I up? Awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see that. That's my standard question to ask to make sure. Awesome. And I'll just reiterate as well, please do stop me if there's any questions you want to ask in the moment, or again, at the end, I can certainly field some after the video as well. All right. So I am Kate Shellaway, and I am the Associate Director in the Career Development Center. My goal today is to, if you're unfamiliar with our office, just give you a quick overview and remind you all that our services are still available to you as an alumni. So that you're welcome to continue to come back to the office for more individual support or some of our events, things like that. And then we'll dive into this idea of job offers and how to kind of look at them holistically. We'll focus a little bit on some of the salary piece because that's always a very popular discussion, and how and what is kind of up for negotiation in that process. And this really does go, I'll say, whether you are maybe a newer alum still looking for that first position or that first step for yourself after graduation, or if you've been around the block a little bit and are making a transition or anything like that. Okay. So again, just a little about our office in case you're unaware. We are here to help you with the entire gamut and scope of your career journey. So whether that's, a month after graduation, 20 years after graduation, you can still come back to our office. You can have one-on-one appointments with our career counseling team to talk about any of those topics that you see there on the right, whether it's, updating resumes, interview practice, talking through a job offer. Sometimes you just need a sounding board for some of your pieces of your career development, and we can be here to help you out with those elements. A lot of our online tools are also still accessible to you. So we have our Handshake, which is our job and internship database. Ram Nation, which is a system of alumni who have volunteered their time to kind of act as almost like a flash mentorship, but alumni who want to just take advantage of making those connections with those alumni mentors are also welcome to join. Big Interview is a mock interview system online. So there's a lot of things that are really at your fingertips still. Okay. All right. Any questions about our office? Okay, great. So then let's dive into the offer process. And what we're going to really talk about today are these four main areas, which is this idea of kind of some self-reflection, which you'll never hear me talk about career development without some self-reflection piece, because you really have to know what you value and what you want to be able to evaluate an offer and to be able to evaluate a job and see if it's the right fit for you. Research, particularly salary research, so that you're making informed comments and informed negotiations because you've done your research. And then how we really evaluate an offer once you have it and how that negotiation process works. So you might have noticed that reflection piece and research piece is really going to be happening anytime. It should be happening now. It should be happening long before you start interviewing or before you get that actual written offer in your hand, which is why we're going to lead off with those two, because they really set a nice foundational groundwork for everything else that you're going to be doing. Okay. So just to kind of warm up with a little bit of that reflection piece, I'm going to put two offers up here on the screen, just with some base information, and feel free to either unmute yourself or just in the chat tell me which offer do you think you would choose. This is just what you know about it. Just give you a second to read through those. And I'm just going to reshare for a second. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Let me try to get off the weird screen share that was happening. All right, so hopefully that should look better for everybody. All right. So, and you don't need to share this out loud by any means, but just kind of thinking to yourself, not only which offer would you choose, but what information is missing, right? So what other information do you need to make an informed decision? A lot of the times when people think about offers, they think about salary and they kind of stop there. But there are many pieces to an offer. Kelly, did you want to share anything?
Yeah. One thing that I think would need to be stated in their offer is health benefits and so on.
Excellent. Yep. So that's another really great piece to it. And when you are evaluating these offers, you're really starting to evaluate your own values and what's important to you in a job offer. And just as Kelly said, you're starting to see, you know, what is part of an offer that is important to me, what's missing, what would a company offer, what wouldn't it, right? There's no right or wrong between these two offers. You might say, you know what, working at a smaller organization is worth it to me because I don't want to work at a large company or organization, even though maybe I'm getting paid a little less money. Or this idea of working in Philadelphia, which keeps me maybe close to home and family, is important to me. Or some of you might be like, nope, I'm ready for my next adventure and I'm looking to move out of it, right? So all of these elements are things that you need to evaluate and kind of see where do you fall on them. And in this next slide, it kind of breaks down a little bit more of the composition of a job and the many pieces that come into play. Like I said, salary is a lot of what people think about, but all of these other pieces matter. And if you haven't had a ton of work experience, you might not have had a lot of exposure to some of the elements of a full-time job yet, but you can still do some self-reflection and figure out, well, what would be important to me, right? So you may not have ever necessarily been in a position where your company paid for professional development, right? But maybe that's something that's important to you, particularly if you're a younger alum and you're looking to build your skills. It's not just about the hard pieces of the benefits, but those other pieces of, you know, what's the culture at a company like? How am I going to feel going into that job every day? Am I going to be surrounded by a supportive environment, right? So those things that might sometimes be non-tangible are still things you have to pay attention to when evaluating a job offer. So again, just kind of reflect for yourself. No need to necessarily share, but what is important to you and what is not. Because when you get to that point of going through the interview, you're going to be finding out a lot about that company and whether or not they match these values that you have. And then definitely when you have a hard job offer in front of you, it's going to be even more clear, you know, is what they're offering matching what you're saying your priorities are. So some of these things might be your top ones. Some of them you might not care about too much at all. That's great. Those are things that you can be more flexible on. Okay. So again, that was hopefully just to get you thinking a little bit more, self-reflecting a little bit. Because like I said, this comes into play long before you actually have an offer in hand. The entire career development process is really just a circular self-reflection, right? What do I like? What do I value? What can I live without? What's made me unhappy at past jobs? How can I change that for future jobs? It's just all of that values piece. Okay. So next we're going to dive into one of the elements that takes a little bit more time, which is research and the pre-research that you should be doing on places. You may have heard this idea of research come into play, again, even before like an interview, because when you're going into an interview, a company wants to know that you know about the job, you know about their organization, you know why you're applying for that job, right? So a lot of this pre-research on a bigger scope is important for all of the elements of the job search process. Particularly salary, which is what I'm going to dive into next, but I also wanted to articulate the fact that you want to research everything that you possibly can about that organization, about the types of roles that you're looking for, regardless of where they might be. Do that legwork beforehand because you're really going to have more ability to articulate why you're negotiating for something or why you're asking an employer for something because you've done your pre-research. There's a couple of resources on here. I don't know if anyone's been familiar or seen them before. Salary and pay scale are certainly very helpful for helping you calculate or see what's the kind of common salary for this job, maybe in this physical location. Occupational Outlook Handbook is descriptions of different roles. So again, really nice because you can kind of see, well, what's the typical day look like? What kind of skills do they need? So you can be evaluating yourself and your fit for that role, and how many skills and things are kind of parallel to what your experience is. I don't know if anyone's ever used Glassdoor, but that's another great one. You can literally go on there and look at a company. I see some hands up. So if you want to go work at, Vanguard or something like that, you can bring up the company reviews. You can bring up, people will post interviewing questions that they received when they did an interview for that company, and they'll post their salary ranges for different things as well. There's a lot of great online research that you can do, to set yourself up to be realistic in what you're going to ask for down the road. And the big one I'll say is the last one on that list, which is talk to other people. Talk to professionals who are in your field, who are in your industry, who are at the exact company that you're looking for. Go to your network, and ask and have these conversations about what's common for an entry level position, or I've got this many years of experience. How flexible do you think they'll be on salary? Those are individuals who've already been there, done that. They know these things, and they're a really great resource of information for you. And I'll just say, if that idea of networking is something that you're not as comfortable with, or you're not sure how to use, that might be a great thing to have a follow-up appointment with the Career Center on, or join that Ram Nation group or LinkedIn, things like that, to help build it, because that can certainly be very powerful, in your job search process. All right. So to hone in specifically a little bit more on salary, which is, I often find everyone's kind of tricky spot. It's not always a comfortable conversation. They don't really know where to begin. And I understand that it can certainly be a tough one. But if you've done your research, like I said, you have sound reason, and knowledge behind why you're asking for that particular salary. And really importantly, you know your worth then. And that's a lot of what that, calculating your salary expectations goes into. So when we say like the market rate, I'm talking about all that, research we just talked about. Go online, talk to people. You'll get a lot of different salary feedback. You'll probably get a nice range from that of, okay, the roles I'm looking for typically pay, 40,000 to 55,000. Great. I've got this nice range to start with. The second thing is keeping in mind the location impacts of where you're going. So you might live, in Westchester today, but you want to move to LA. You're going to see a lot higher salaries because the cost of living out there is a lot more expensive. So don't think you're just making a ton more if you move to that place. You have to take in cost of living. For example, in Philadelphia, there's a 4% wage tax if you work in Philly, right? That's a huge wage tax there. And even more if you work and live in the city, boundaries. So those are the things when we say location, that you kind of have to take into play, because it might look higher or lower some places, but the cost of living is very impactful on that. And the third really important one is you. So again, if you're newer to the field, I think a lot of times individuals tend to underestimate what they bring to the table. But you still have experiences, you still have gained different skill sets. So you still want to evaluate, how does my experience and what I'm bringing and my personal attributes contribute to this salary that I should be prepared to give? Especially if you're someone who's maybe transitioning or has more years of experience, right, under your belt, those things are even more impactful in that you part and how all of these things come together, so that you kind of have a salary expectation within a range. One really great thing to think about, particularly, for whenever you might be asked about salary, is to not have an exact number, but to be able to give a range. And that range, where that lower piece of your range is kind of your minimum, and then you have more of that reaching part, about $10,000 range is usually a good place to be. This helps make sure that you are not, undercutting yourself, right? So they might know that they're willing to pay someone $60,000, but you say, "Oh, I'm happy at 40,000." right? They're not going to push you and say, oh, we'll pay this, right? So you don't want to undercut yourself, and you don't want to overshoot by so much that it makes someone wonder if you're too far apart that you can't kind of meet in the middle, and then they might hesitate to kind of offer you anything because of that. So that's why a range is really the way to go. And if you've done all three of these pieces and kind of put these elements together, you should have a realistic range that matches what the employers are looking for and keeps you happy and what you might be offering. All right. So one of the things that's extra challenging about the salary expectations, and why I wanted to talk about it first a little bit, is because it can come at you in a lot of different places in your job search. So some employers, you might see it right in the job description where they say either on the application or in your cover letter to us, tell us what your salary expectations are. That's where I see most people like panic and struggle a little bit because you only know about, what's written on that job description, and it can be really challenging. So what I would say is, we're going to talk about this in a second too, is that hopefully the later in the process it comes up, usually the more comfortable people are in talking about it. You might be asked in an interview situation to give your salary expectations, or the interviewer might say something like, this job is going to pay in the low 40s. Are you comfortable with that? Right. So you might not even necessarily have it be asked for a direct range, but just having that conversation about salary might be brought up early. And in an interview, commonly not the first one, but usually if you have the second or third, that's when they might start bringing that piece up and asking about expectations. And then obviously the offer is where it's more clear and direct, and we'll talk about that more. I just really wanted to point out that it can happen kind of anywhere along the way here in this process, and you have to be ready and comfortable to answer any of those questions in that moment when they're asking for it. One last thing on the salary negotiation piece, I kind of hit on this a little bit with the early element. If you can push that conversation as much as you can, it's going to be better for you. Again, if all you know is the job description in front of you, that might not be a ton to go on. So if you can push that discussion back politely a little bit, kind of put the question almost back onto the employer, it might buy you some time to either do this research if you haven't done it, or to make sure that you're fully informed about this job. Because sometimes when you get into an interview, you learn a lot more about what your job tasks will be, and it might impact what you think that salary is really worth. So you'll see kind of in that a little example about how you might be able to redirect that question politely in a way that still shows your interest, but allows you to, again, just give yourself a little bit more time to rest on this. Because when possible, it's nice to have the employer give you some indicator of salary first before you have to offer what yours is. Because you might be really surprised. You might have found that your averages that you were looking at, this particular employer happens to be a higher paying person and they pay above that. And now you know that because they've given you an indicator in some way or another what your salary is, or you might be able to adjust that range that you give them. That's not always possible, obviously, but there is ways to kind of try to have a conversation about it before you give your actual number or that actual range. So I know the salary piece is a lot. Any questions right now on kind of how we even just form this base knowledge about salary? Go ahead.
Yeah. If they don't bring it up in the initial interview, when should you ask about it?
That's a great question. So, usually in those initial interviews, it's nice to avoid it for two reasons. One, again, there's less pressure on you to have to come up with something. And two, you want to show that your priorities are all about getting to know this job, getting to know them, seeing if you're the right fit. So if it doesn't come up in like the first interview, that's not a bad thing. Let that go. And then I would say there's two time frames that you can bring it up. And this would really depend on you as an individual more than anything else. If you've gone into kind of round 2 or round 3, or you know that it's the final interview round and you want to start to have that conversation, you can certainly ask that question of, if I am offered this position, you know, when would I get that offer, or how would, you know, when can we have that discussion about the different elements of it? You certainly could bring that up. But here's what I'll say. No one's going to give you an offer, expect you to say yes without telling you what you're going to make. So usually your safest bet is to wait again until you're kind of at the end of that, or till you have the offer in hand. And then that's when you have the most power, is when you have the offer. So that's why the negotiation side of things, it's nice to be able to wait for that offer. The caveat to that is if you're going down a path of the job and you're getting any indicators that the salary might be significantly different than your expectations, I would say don't hesitate to bring it up, because you also don't want to waste their time. If you're at interview 2 and you're clearly seeing like, wow, this salary is, we're $20,000 apart from what I think we're going to be, maybe have that conversation earlier so that you don't go into another interview when you know that you have no intent of taking it, and you're giving up, you know, you're letting that interviewer know to take you out of the running as well. So it's a little bit of, depends on the situation and the individual, but for the most part, later down the road and when you get that offer, it's going to be the best time to start to have that conversation. Awesome question. Thank you for that. All right. So then let's kind of swing into this idea of the evaluations and negotiation. So you did everything great. You had an awesome interview and they come back to you, you've got an offer for the job. For the most part, you know, everything's a little bit dependent on the company, but typically they'll call you, you'll get more of a verbal offer first, or they might jump right to a written offer via email. But you'll have some kind of, hey, we're offering it to you at this salary with these benefits, right? So then you have that time to reflect, negotiate before you go back and actually sign a contract. So that's usually what's at the end of an offer letter is, here's your contract, sign it, get back to us, and that's your official acceptance of the offer. So just in case you might not have as much familiarity or seeing kind of a more formal offer letter, they usually are constructed and have all of these different elements in it, from what your actual job title is, which again is actually something that could be negotiable, what the reporting structure is, so who's going to be your supervisor, your boss, salary, probably a summary of benefits information, when you're going to start, and again, that last kind of acknowledgement offer. It's always good to have this. So even if someone calls you on the phone and gives you a verbal offer, it's okay to say, like, you know, can I get that in writing? Do you mind emailing me a written offer so that you have everything? Because you know how sometimes you're talking to someone and maybe taking down notes or something like that, but that formal offer is going to have everything in it. So you will want to make sure you get that at some point. Definitely get that written offer before you would commit to any type of employment. This is, like I said, the time for you to evaluate. A mistake I see, or something that I think sometimes individuals are hesitant about, is, oh my gosh, I got a phone call. This person's offering me the job. I have to say yes on the spot. And you do not need to do that, right? So if you get that call back, congratulations, you have the job offer. You are allowed to ask for time to think about it. You can put it on them and say, you know, what is your timeline? When do you need me to make a decision by? That way that you're, you know, letting them kind of tell you. If they just say as soon as possible, at least 24 hours is incredibly appropriate to ask for. So at least kind of like, can I sleep on it? Can I take that one day to give yourself the time to really read through that offer and evaluate it to see if it's the right fit for you. So that's just one thing I'll often see people just jump to yes, because they feel like they're not being grateful if they don't say yes right away. But it is to your benefit to take that minute and really think about it. But again, you can still say, I'm so excited for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. You know, I would love to be able to think about it a little bit. Do you mind if I get back to you by the end of the day tomorrow? Something as short and sweet as that. Okay. All right. So the next couple of things are kind of going to break down some elements that you might see in an offer. And again, some of you might be pretty familiar with this. Some of these things might be a little bit new. So when I'm talking about benefits here, I am talking about inclusively some items that might be part of your offer. This isn't necessarily a be all end all list, but these are some really common ones that are going to be within that letter or within the possible benefits at your organization or at that company. We're going to talk next about what might be more actually negotiable, because not everything is negotiable, but let's just kind of talk first about all the pieces. So reflecting back even to the beginning when we had that anatomy of a job, right? Thinking what's important to me, what's not as important to me, where do my values lie? Hopefully you can kind of look at this benefits example list and see how it might pair with some of those values that you would come up with earlier, so you can see what's the most important to me. And it might sound odd, but don't be afraid to ask questions. So you don't get often like too much detail in that first opening offer or even that written offer letter, right? So you might have follow-up questions for the person that you interviewed with. Some of them they might be able to answer. Some of them they might need to say like, oh, you're going to have to contact our HR office for that, to talk to them, anything along those lines. But do not hesitate to ask those questions. For example, let's say that you have a pre-existing, chronic health problem, and you want to know, does my health insurance cover that, right? Because that's huge. If you have a health insurance that doesn't cover something that is a chronic health issue for you, you're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, right? So it's within your benefit and right to kind of see if you can figure out, is that piece of things covered? For some people, this idea, let's be honest, we live in COVID, so this idea of flexible hours and work hours might be really important. It might look very different for a company now than it does in a year. So you might want to talk that through with them of what is your company policy on these things, because it's going to look a little different right now if you get that position, but they might have a plan to go fully back in person with no flexible hours in the long run. Did you have a question?
Would one thing to be asked for a company is like, what are their, how do they accommodate like disabled Americans?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That is absolutely a great question. Yeah. What is their accommodation policy on those things would certainly be part of it. Mm-hmm. And you put up a great point there too. Again, there's things that are so personal to you that sometimes it might not be described in the basic offer package, but you should be asking those things to make sure you're getting those answers. Mm-hmm. Because again, even if it's not something that's negotiable, you still want to be evaluating it in the offer and deciding, is that something that I have the wiggle room and I can accept on or not? Mm-hmm. And again, just to kind of really hit this piece home, take everything into account. So not just here's my benefit offers, but how did my interview go? What's the company culture going to be like there? Because if you can make $1 million, but if you think it's a place that you're not going to be happy in, it's probably not going to be a place you're going to last very long, right? Even if that salary is really great. So it's every piece in deciding, where can I back off of this, priority or value because I'm getting in place of it this other thing that's a higher priority for me and it's a better match. Okay. So then to speak a little bit more to the items that tend to be something that you can actually discuss and talk about and maybe negotiate a little bit. Again, not a be all end all list, but the very common ones to look at and very common ones for you to hopefully feel comfortable talking about with that employer that's giving you the offer. So what I'll say is that so much of this depends on the company and the industry that you're in and those other circumstances. There's going to be some things that companies are just not able to adjust. So for example, I work in a unionized environment. So I have a union contract that gets bargained for every year. So I couldn't ask up front, can I have extra vacation days? Because that's part of my union and the position I'm in, that they get this many vacation days, right? But not every place will be like that. So it really is, again, just dependent on those different ones. So 2 different jobs you apply to, one might have a lot more flexibility than the other. But again, you don't know until you ask, which is why it's important to be prepared for that negotiation. And then be flexible and creative, right? So if the salary doesn't seem like it's going to be a wiggle room, right? Your annual salary, are they willing to give you a signing on bonus, right? Because for them, that's just one pot of money once, which is still great for you. But it doesn't make them have to increase your salary earlier on, which obviously has a trickle effect about how much you'll continue to make at that company going forward. sometimes you'll get things like, okay, after a year, if you have a good performance review, we'll add $1 to your hourly salary. Okay. Can we move that up from a year to 6 months? That might not seem like a lot, but that's several $100s added up if you can get that great performance review and have $1 extra to your salary for an additional 6 months compared to if you had to wait for that full year of review. If you're moving, do they support that relocation cost? Can they put you up somewhere until you get settled? All of these elements you really can get creative on and see what are they willing to do. I pick on professional development sometimes because it's easy to overlook. But I knew someone who the position that they ended up taking, their company paid for like thousands and thousands of dollars worth of specific IT related certificates. So that was something their company paid for. And now they have these certifications that they can take to the next job and be able to leverage somewhere else. So again, these are things that are hard to think about in the moment of, yes, I got the job offer, but they all come into play into your whole benefits packet. Any questions on what might be something to negotiate on or something you might want to stick away from, anything like that?
I think, yeah, that third block right there, schedule and remote work flexibility. And how would that work, especially as we're transitioning back to in-person work?
Yeah. So again, particularly in this time frame, starting it out with maybe just a question, if that's not already clear, which is, you've explained in COVID, this is how we're going to be. Do you know what the plan for the company will be? Once we're able to open back up and once this pandemic gets under control, because they might say, this has actually worked great for our company and we're going to continue to work with our employees and come up with that flexibility and remote scheduling, right? Because there's a lot of companies who are getting rid of their huge, spaces that they're renting because they're saving a ton of money having their individuals work at home, right? So it really just depends on maybe some of the answer to that question. And then being able to, this is definitely one of the ones that can seem vague, and that's why it's important to have it in writing. So if you negotiate the fact that you will be able to work up to 2 days a week at home, and then that's in the written contract that you get, right? So that's where that important piece would be if they show that flexibility. And it could be that, your typical day is 8 to 5, but maybe you're like, I have kids that I have to pick up at daycare by 5. Can my day be 8 to 4 or 7 to 4? Or, you know what I mean? Or I do 2 extra hours somewhere else, something like that, so that you can even just talk about what that scheduling piece is. So it's definitely a good one to speak about and definitely an important one to get in writing, because the execution of it in your job can sometimes change once you get there. But if it's in your contract, you have that to rely on and be able to point to should something not align once you actually start the position. That's a great question. Okay, so just a thing to kind of think about when it comes to this negotiation piece is trying to have the right mindset. Most of the candidates, the people who are applying for the job, have this mindset of, I got an offer, I don't want to push it, I don't want to miss out on this offer, I don't want to make them mad, right? But the employer is usually thinking, this is a great candidate. They wouldn't have offered you that position if they didn't want you on their team. And they're going to try to do whatever it is that they can within their power to make sure that you say yes to this offer, right? So as you can see how those mindsets sometimes might contradict one another and sometimes kind of give the power back to the employer. But again, you will never have as much power to negotiate as you do right now, offer in hand, because they want you. It may have taken that employer months to find someone. If you say no, they might not have had another candidate that they liked enough to even offer it, and they might have to go back to the drawing board and redo all the interviews, right? So you never know the situation that they're in, but what you know is that they liked you, they offered you the position, they're going to want to work with you to make sure that you're happy coming into this position. Okay. All right, so a couple other just tips in general on the conversation, like how do I prepare to actually make these requests? I'll reiterate the gratitude piece. Thank you for this offer. I'm so excited to be having this opportunity to, be able to join your team. You're starting off on a really nice, polite and professional groundwork there. Be specific in what you're requesting and outlining it for them. Because it is, a back and forth. So you want to be specific so that they know, what am I asking for? Because sometimes it's not that person that's making the decision. They have to go talk to somebody else to make that decision. Be specific in what you're asking. And then kind of give that supportive data. So you'll see in the example there, that thank you for your time, looking at this role because of our conversations. I know that my skill sets in X, Y, and Z, or my experience at this will bring a lot. And because of that, my salary range is here. Okay. So just kind of really clearly stating what it is you want. And this might be a phone conversation that you're having with someone. Often it is. That's nice because you can get the back and forth done quicker versus sometimes if you're emailing, right, back and forth, as you email, they have to see it, they might have to ask, there's a lot of different pieces. So sometimes this really does warrant the phone conversation. Some other tips when you're doing that, just to kind of keep in mind, again, kind of that rationale piece is really helpful. And when I say rationale, they don't want to know, I want to make this much money because I have a lot of school debt, right? That's not what I'm saying with rationale. That might be your own personal rationale, and that's okay. But the facts of why you have, your experiences and background and this role and everything equal somewhere in that salary range. It's good to pay attention to how you word things. It might seem cliche, but even, not saying I so much, but we, like, what can we do, right? It makes it feel like it's a decision that you're making together because you want to be part of this team versus it just being about you and what works best for you. Because instead you're saying, I want to know what can work best for both of us. Something that's very hard. This goes for, I'll see people struggle with it in interviews as well, is that need to fill the silence. You just told someone something that they're probably not going to have an answer for in 1 second, right? They have to think about it. If it's salary, for example, they might know what their cap salary is. So they might be thinking about, okay, what's my counter offer to that? You may have thought of something really flexible and creative that they hadn't thought about before, and now they have to kind of mull over, is that a possibility? Those kinds of things. So don't feel like you say something and because you hear nothing within a few seconds, you have to fill this silence. Because what people often do is start to backtrack on what they just said or start to downgrade themselves because they're worried that they've somehow, offended them, and that's why they're being quiet. So let it sit. It might feel awkward, but give that person time to think about your offer. So that, because they're trying to figure out, how can I best reply to this? So that don't fill the silence piece is really hard, but a good one to think about. And I really just that little piece to the on the purple side. This is what people who do offers do, is they negotiate. It's not surprising to them when someone comes back with a negotiation. And I think as candidates, we all think, no, it's weird. They're going to think it's odd if I don't just accept. But on their end, they're used to doing this. They know people want different things out of jobs, and they're not going to be surprised if you want to negotiate on things, right? So remember, the power is in your hands, just making sure that you really take advantage of that. All right. Questions right now. We're doing a lot of talking, so hopefully everything's kind of settling in.
I would say ask for more. That ask for more than you want, so there's room to negotiate. How do you do that in a way that doesn't come off as rude? Because I've tried that sometimes in the past, and that's what they interpreted it as that.
Mm-hmm. So no, it's a really great point. And I think that it's a balancing act, right? Particularly, so if we take this in the vein of specifically salary, that's where the range comes into play. Because if you bump that range up a little bit, you still have your minimum of, okay, I'll take this, but what I, would prefer is in the middle. And what I'm really excited about is at that higher end. So sometimes that's how the range can really help that piece of asking for more than you want, but still showing your flexibility. And that's really what you want to do, is showing that flexibility and that appreciation piece. When you're making offers too, this is why it comes back to priorities, right? You might have 8 things you want to negotiate. Don't negotiate all 8 things right at once. That's when it can sometimes come off as like all about you or that you're asking for too much, right? So maybe pick those 3 or 4 items that are most important to you. And that last bullet you'll see there, knowing what you're willing to accept and being able to counteroffer on the spot sometimes can be helpful, because if they say no to this one thing, you've got plan B in your back pocket then that you can ask for. Like, okay, if salary is something that you can't give wiggle room on, do you have the ability to work with me on the amount of personal days that I get in a year or something like that? And again, that I mentioned it a little bit briefly. Sometimes it really does come down to language choice. So this might be something, if you ever want to schedule an appointment and talk to someone one-on-one to kind of work out your script almost, I guess, for making offers. Because sometimes just the words that we choose, like I want this, right, sounds a lot more aggressive than, some things that are priorities to me are work-life balance. We talked about that in the interview. That's why I was hoping that I could have this flexibility for my schedule, right? It's sometimes really just in how you say it, not necessarily what you're saying. So if you're worried, especially if it's that how part, I would practice that with someone so that you can kind of see their reaction to it and see how you're coming off. Mm-hmm. Good question. All right, the next 2 things I have are kind of tied into this, and you'll see I labeled them as tough scenarios. They're the ones that we hear about a lot, and the, oh no, what do I do if I'm in this situation? In relevance to, I have a job offer. So the first common one that we talk about a lot is, I interviewed with company A, I got an offer from company A, but now I'm interviewing with company B, and that's the one I really want, right? That's the one I really want to be at. So this balancing act of time often is what you're doing. And then the idea of kind of what risk are you willing to take? If you're going to be happy at company A and you like all the benefits and you like all of that piece, is it worth the risk of losing that offer because company B is that dream job that you're looking for? And that's kind of a personal decision, but you can try to balance the timeline as much as that's within your power. So you might ask company A for a few extra days. So back to that first, like, oh, you got an offer, you might say, do you mind if I have 3 days to think about that? Buying yourself a little extra time. Or if they say, can you let us know by tomorrow? You might say, do you mind if I let you know by Thursday, right? So just trying to give yourself as much wiggle room as you can. And then knowing you might have a few days of negotiation conversation as well. And then sometimes it is talking to both, to the company about it. So you might have finished your interview with company B and say, look, I have another offer on the table, but this is really where I would want to be. Can we talk about the timeline or where I might stand as a candidate, just to be transparent? So this is definitely a tough one. If you're applying for a lot of things and interviewing around the same times, you might find yourself in this scenario. Other common one that we will see is I've actually accepted an offer. So you've interviewed, you've gone through negotiations, you've accepted an offer from somewhere, and something else comes along, often out of the blue. Because if you had known about it before, hopefully you would have been doing more of that balancing act in that previous scenario. This is a tough place to be, but generally speaking, you want to stay as true to your word as you can. And not burn any bridges and not alienate any opportunity. So you really, just because that job comes back and maybe it's a higher pay and it might look really great, but your plan to start that other job in a week, stay in touch with that recruiter, thank them, reiterate your appreciation for it and how much you enjoyed the company, but that you've already accepted a position and are starting somewhere else. So you're not burning bridges, you're keeping that line of your network and communication open. You're sending that thank you note, but then you're sticking with that offer that you accepted, which is another tough one. And we've seen various things happen because employers sometimes report that stuff back to us, especially if you did any recruiting on our actual campus. So that can also be a tough situation when it comes to job offers. All right. I'm going to pause there for a second. Questions about anything that we've discussed today, whether it's these last scenarios, the salary negotiations, evaluating offers as a whole, anything. And again, we'll definitely have a few minutes later at the end too, if you have any specific individual questions as well. The thing with negotiations is that, you know, there's not necessarily a totally right way that, you know, you're going to go negotiate every job the same exact way. Like we said, so much of it depends on you as an individual, the place that you're applying, what their flexibility is, what type of industry it is, all of those different things. So there's not kind of this foolproof script to follow with this, but realize in the end that a successful negotiation is meant to benefit both parties. So this isn't a win-lose, you know, kind of situation. Everybody in this at play, the employer and you, wants to come to a nice, happy agreement, right? Because they want you to be excited to come to this role. They want to have gotten a really great candidate within, you know, the restrictions that they have within the salary range that they wanted to pay. And then for you, if you negotiated well, you're feeling valued by that company, heard by that company already before you even started. So it really is meant to be, you know, it sounds cheesy, but, you know, something that you do together, that win-win piece is really what a successful negotiation ends with. So if you can keep that end in mind, hopefully it makes you feel more comfortable and confident and asking for things. And again, not second guessing what you're asking for, because they expect it and they want to come to that happy ending and happy conclusion as well. So just a quick reminder. So if you are currently looking for a position, like I said, Handshake is our online job and internship database. If you put a resume in there, the Career Center will see it and give you feedback. It's where you can schedule appointments with our office, should that be something that you want as a next step. A lot of different pieces to it. Again, a really easy way to stay connected with our office for events, for all of these different resources that I spoke about. And then obviously from the employer standpoint, anything that companies come to us with is going to go into here. So I'll say Handshake is probably most ideal for younger alum and a current student, because it's typically who they know they're applying or who they're looking for. There are still jobs that might have someone who's a little bit higher up, but or further along in their career process. But for the most part, you know, those younger alums are going to probably benefit the most from the types of jobs that are posted there. But again, you still have all those other things that you have access to on Handshake. But I just kind of wanted to give that forewarning to the system. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing now, because that is all I had for today. Which again, I know was a lot, because I just did a whole heck of a lot of talking, but I appreciate your questions. They were all fantastic. And like I said, a next step for you might be, if you need some more one-on-one time, come talk to the Career Center and we can kind of walk through whatever might be, you know, in your individual world right now.